Political and policy juggernaut shaking the Democratic Party, the AOC effect. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been in office about 3 weeks, but her ideas and what she represents are having a huge impact. Consider a rookie legislator who is legally too young to run for the Senate, let alone the White House, now has potential candidates reacting to her and criticizing her economic agenda. The first thing to know about this dynamic is it's broader than partisan politics. AOC has been arguing for a tradition of moral politics, civil rights, and economic reform that goes beyond for what passes for a lot of debate in D.C.
Social movements are the moral compass and should be the moral compass of our politics.
I do think a system that allows billionaires to exist when there are parts of Alabama where people are still getting ringworm because they don't have access to public health is wrong.
The wage gap is an injustice that persists through secrecy. It is time that we pay people what they are worth and not how little they are desperate enough to accept.
He's not in the Russell Building, he's not in the floor of the Senate, and 800,000 people don't have their paychecks.
Everyone deserves justice, and everyone deserves equal protection and prosperity.
The predictable fixation only on AOC's style may underestimate her policy appeal. Plenty of other top candidates like Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris are running on similarly progressive economic platforms. A leftward shift, which apparently explains why former Starbucks CEO Howard Schultz is not a Democrat. That's according to his argument in a new round of interviews testing an independent presidential run against Democrats.
No, I'm not a Democrat. I don't affiliate myself with the Democratic Party, who's so far left, who basically wants the government to take over health care, which we cannot afford, the government to give free college to everybody, and the government to give everyone a job, which basically is $40 trillion on the balance sheet of $21.5 trillion. We can't afford it.
I'm going to hear from a very rich person in a moment, but first, a very rich person in ideas.
Thank you.
Liz Plank, host of Vox Media's Considered and a friend of the Beat. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I mentioned that because class is such a big part of this, and we have a very rich person on deck. When it comes to AOC versus Howard Schultz as a potential billionaire running against Democrats, what is important, do you think, about the idea she's advanced?
Right. Well, I think, first of all, Howard Schultz running for president is kind of like Ja Rule organizing another music festival. Like, I don't know no one needs this right now. It's only going to actually benefit Donald Trump because obviously when we have a third party candidate, it often disadvantages Democrats.
Let me say that's a sick burn because the Fry Festival was a failure.
Yes.
Although Howard Schultz, I would trust to run a conference or a gathering more than the country.
He should organize the next Fire Festival. I would trust him to
You've hit on it.
There we go. We found your calling. But one of the really interesting things that I think him and AOC sort of, I mean, they haven't talked to each other in real life, but this sort of standoff that they have is that AOC is exposing the myth of the fiscal conservative, but the socially liberal person, right? So, Howard Schultz says that he is he's taken a stance against racism. He's taken a stance for offering jobs to refugees. He's pro-women, pro-reproductive rights, but he has these very fiscally conservative policies. And what AOC has been able to do is message how those two things are actually completely contradictory. If you believe that Black people and people of color in this country should have equal rights, you have to be supporting them having equal access to health care, to jobs, to opportunities. Same goes with people with disabilities. You can't go on TV and say we want to take off their entitlements. You have to support those benefits.
It's so interesting to hear you analyze that after watching her talk in the arc of moral politics, right?
Yes.
Because Martin Luther King is remembered for civil rights, and yet the organizing he was doing was all about Black power and Black economic capital and uniting with labor and organizing union walkouts in the Midwest, all of that. I want to show for you some of the praise AOC is getting today. Listen to this. MAGA fans saying she's effective. A prominent political advisor says she has something that you can't coach. You either have it or you don't. She has it big league. And then this, gameness, grit, determination, fighting spirit. Compliments from none other than Steve Bannon for AOC today.
Interesting.
Running for president as a centrist independent.
We started hearing.
No, your thoughts.
Okay, wow, that wasn't just in my head. Yes, well, one of the things that AOC is so good at is that she's really good at messaging the Democratic Party's position on many issues. Of course, she's more to the left than what we would expect, but she's really good at messaging ideas that are actually popular, right? So if you think about taxation and the proposal that she's making, first of all, when it comes to taxing very highly rich people and the 70%, 70% of Americans actually support her and in that policy, even though it's being very, there's a lot of fear mongering on the right and a lot of billionaires like Howard Schultz going on television saying that this is very bad. The majority of Americans actually support that policy.
Right.
And it's a long-standing, it's since the 1970s. If you look back, the majority of Americans want to tax the rich more. AOC is able to communicate that message and make that exciting for people who may have not normally been on board.
And as you say, in a way that appears to be impacting some of these billionaires. Now, as promised, I want to raise the net worth of the segment. Do you like this or not?
No,
too much.
You're on fire. No, never.
So before I bring in this next guest, take a listen. Howard Schultz responding to the criticism he gets about being a billionaire.
I've also been criticized for being a billionaire. Let's talk about that. I'm self-made. I grew up in the projects in Brooklyn, New York. I thought that was the American dream.
I'm joined by entrepreneur and venture capitalist Nick Hanauer. He has debated the minimum wage with Howard Schultz. He's the host of a podcast, Pitchfork Economics. And as mentioned, you're a very rich guy. You've been open about that.
Yes, exactly.
You say there's something wrong with what Howard Schultz is doing. What is it?
Absolutely. I love the conversation you've been having, but I just want to make one point, is that it's easy to call what AOC is doing as far lefty, but nothing could be further from the truth. When you advocate for economic policies that benefit the broad majority of citizens, that's true centrism. What Howard Schultz represents, the centrism he represents, is really just trickle-down economics, tax cuts for rich people, deregulation for powerful people, and wage suppression and benefit cuts for everyone else without the overt racism. He is not the centrist. AOC is the centrist. And I think one of her great advantages is she is young enough not to be captured by the neoliberal lies that have framed so much of the politics, by the way, in both the Republican and Democratic Party.
That's so important what you're saying, because that always comes up when there's debates about what's happening in the Democratic Party, and there's a kind of a tailwind underneath whatever might be an open debate, and people have different views on this, and the tailwind is the incredible power of the donor class, as you know.
Yes.
And so take a listen to your point for you and then Liz, to AOC talking about working in the service industry. I mean, Howard Schultz does employ a lot of people in retail. She talks about actually doing that kind of service job. Take a look.
Right.
Little things like trying to afford health insurance when you're a waitress and that kind of economic stress and living through it and enduring past it really showed me in a visceral way what it's like to be an American in a way that I don't think most public officials understand.
Do you agree with that, Nick? And then Liz.
Yeah, 100%. And here's the important point that I think is underappreciated, is it's not just the economic reality that's the problem, it's the narrative that has captured the brains of so many people in the Democratic Party that, for instance, to raise the minimum wage from $2.13 plus tips for tipped workers to $15 an hour will destroy the economy. That is just a straight up lie. There is nothing further from the truth. And the most pernicious thing about trickle-down economics is not the belief that if the rich get richer, that's good for the economy. It is the belief that if poor people get richer, that will be bad for the economy. And finally, we have some political leaders like AOC who are willing to confront those lies and to confront people like Howard Schultz.
Liz?
Yeah, if I can just agree, I think everything that she's saying is not radical at all. If you go to many other countries, I'm actually a survivor of Medicare for All. I'm as a Canadian, and I can tell you it's pretty great.
Is that why you're so nice? Because you're Canadian?
Yeah, it's the free health care. It's great.
Nick, do you
really
think,
recommend it.
The last question, since you've crossed paths with him in those Seattle circles, Nick, briefly, do you think he will run or he'll ultimately drop out as he comes into contact with more of this debate?
you know, I don't know. I found it astounding that he was going to run as an independent. The smartest people in the country have looked at that, and there is zero chance you can win as an independent. So all you are is a spoiler. I'm hoping that he comes to his senses and drops out. Certainly, the reception has not been great.
Well, he has a lot of experience and a very successful company, and nobody denies that. And that's a Vendy big deal.
Yeah, no, but running a bunch of coffee shops.
Did you hear it?
Running a bunch
Vendy
of coffee.
Nick didn't even hear it.
Vendy?
Yeah.
Like,
Vendy big deal?
Venti, no. Running a bunch of coffee shops does not qualify you to be president of the United States.
And I just want to put on record, the no applies both to the terrible pun, but also to the theory that makes you presidential material. Nick Hanauer with the double no. Liz Plank and Nick on Howard Schultz, turning a lot of heads. Thanks to you both. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.